1 year ago this weekend, a St. Louis suburb of 21,000 became a household name across the country and much of the world. Ferguson. That can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But is our region any different than it was before Michael Brown and Darren Wilson crossed paths on Campfield Drive? And if we are different, is it for the better? The national press is already in town for this anniversary, but never mind the story they tell. What are we telling each other? How has Ferguson changed us? Stay tuned. Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned. We're starting at the table tonight and just going to dive right in on this conversation with 3 folks. Welcome back to the show to all of you, and with 3 very different perspectives on this to help us have a good conversation. We'll introduce everyone first. Rasheen Aldridge, Jr., the Ferguson Commission member, the youngest Ferguson Commission member. Gwen Moore, curator, Missouri History Museum. Thank you for being here, Gwen. And Chief Tim Fitch, retired Chief Tim Fitch, formerly of the St. Louis County Police Department, now with Fitch LLC. We should, just to clarify for folks, you had stepped down from and retired from the St. Louis County Police Department prior to this time last year.
5 months prior.
5 months prior to anything that happened last August. Gwen, I'll start with you, the historian at the table.
Okay.
Help us put this in perspective. I know these are things you've been thinking about as a historian. Is this something that is rewriting textbooks, or is this a kind of a blip on our local radar? How do you see it?
I don't think it's a blip. I have been looking at, historically, at the relationship between African Americans in the city of St. Louis, in the state of Missouri, and the legal system. And that's been a troubled relationship. And of course, it has a lot to do with the way most African Americans came here. We came here not on our own free will. We came here as primarily slaves, and our movements were strictly regulated. And that's for slaves and free. I'm going to go way back.
That's okay.
I'm going to go way back to the antebellum period, and that's before the Civil War. And we had some very, very stringent laws that regulated the behavior of free blacks and slaves. All blacks had to have a pass at all times. And if you were caught without that pass, you could be arrested. You could be punished. That was a law that only applied to black people. It did not apply to free whites, but it applied to free blacks. You could not even be in a religious service without a white observer there. You could not be in any assemblage without a white observer there. There were slave patrols that policed your behavior. So this troubled relationship is long-standing. So you can understand this sort of wariness that blacks and law enforcement have, because they were so strictly policed. And let me just say that I'm looking at this as part of a larger problem, that policemen are state actors. They're agents of the state, and they enforce the laws. So if a law says you have to have a pass to be on the street, it's incumbent upon that police officer to make sure you have that pass. So it's the laws. We have to look at the larger society.
So will historians 200 years from now be looking back to this time that we're living through now as any sort of...
Absolutely. One of the things that we're doing at the History Museum is that we are doing a Ferguson collecting initiative. We're doing a Ferguson Oral History Project, because we realize that this is going to be a moment, or it's a movement, that's going to be investigated by historians for decades and decades to come. Historians usually say we need at least 25 years of distance from an event to actually look at it objectively and interpret it. And so we're right in the heat of this movement. We're right in the heat of the moment. So it's very passionate, and people are very emotional. So we do need a little distance before we can be more objective about what's going on now. But all I want to say is that these problems did not happen overnight. It's long-standing.
People would say that was a long time ago. You're saying that has informed our relationships with each other today.
Well, I used the antebellum period as sort of the beginning of all of this relationship, but it has progressed all the way up to the present day. I mean, I was just thinking about the Kerner Commission, which one of the things the Kerner Commission said, which was in 1968, was that we need a more diverse and sensitive police force. They said that in 1968. We're saying that today. So things have been progressing in this, maybe not progressing is the right word, because that gives I guess the opinion that something is getting better. And I don't mean it in that way, but I mean this is the way that the history is moving forward. And so things have not changed as much as we would like to think they have changed.
And history is informing this conversation, but also this is a conversation that started earlier in the week. So before we continue, I just want to go to what we learned on Tuesday. Every Tuesday we have a Twitter chat. You can follow along with the hashtag StayTunedSTL. Let's take a look at what we learned and what has informed this conversation this week.
This week's Stay Tuned Twitter chat discussed the various stories, told and untold, in the past year since the police shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson. There has been an array of conversations as well as personal reflections since August 9, 2014. Many of those points of view represented in Tuesday night's chat. Since August 9th, the tweeters seem to have a better understanding of their personal realities. Understanding privileges as well as racial barriers were discussed. Some also noticed there are more real conversations about race in their circles. One of the participants, Chuck Baker, said, "I've been made more aware of my white privilege, more alarmed at people who think Ferguson doesn't or shouldn't affect them." When asked what stories are being missed, we got a lot of different answers. Dee Nichols, local social entrepreneur and activist in the movement, was very vocal on this matter. She mentioned stories of love, stories of the residents of Canfield, and personal transformations are missing from mainstream media. These stories ought not be ignored, as they create space for empathetic engagement and also allow space for truth of what this movement is versus what mainstream media presents and sensationalizes. When asked about the issues that have been brought to light over the last year, the participants of the chat agreed that the issues have always been present, and Michael Brown's death was the final straw. The priority and the manners on how to address those issues differ. There is also differing of opinion on if any change has occurred. Where Solomon Alexander expected police departments to be less in number, Jalen Henderson has experienced more unity. There also seemed to be a desire for more spaces to have conversations openly and face-to-face, and there's concern if everyone is invited to the table when having these conversations. Want to be a part of our next chat? Follow us on Twitter at StayTunedSTL and join the conversation on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. with the hashtag StayTunedSTL.
Thanks to Maya Northfleet for curating that. And I should mention that this is just one example that the 9 Network is committed to continuing the coverage of issues that are vital to our region, both on air and online. A couple of excellent points we can pick up on from there. First, Chief, I just want to ask you, when you hear Gwen talk about this long history of tension between the African Americans in our country and the police, is that how folks who wear the badge feel about it?
There certainly have been. I agree with her 100%, especially the point that she made about people are mad at the police, but that's not where this starts. It starts with the government officials. Now, I will tell you that there comes a time when police have to say, this is mayor, county executive, governor, this isn't the way we should be doing business as law enforcement. And I was fortunate to have that, be able to have that conversation when I was the chief, when Charlac put speed cameras out on Interstate 170. And I said, listen, this isn't about safety, this is about raising revenue for the city. And law enforcement should not be in the business of raising revenue. That's not what we're here for. But was told by my elected officials I should get off of that, just leave it alone. So I think, when you look at where the protests have been, it's been mostly against law enforcement. Think about who's asking law enforcement to do those things. That's where the protest should be.
Of course, it's not all about speed cameras, or sometimes it's just about the personal interactions, a certain feeling. You tell me, what do protesters say when they talk about the relationship with police?
No, I agree. I think, of course, the reason that the people in Canfield that started all of this stood up wasn't solely because of police brutality. It also is because that community doesn't seem the same, don't have the same economic income that other communities have. They're not getting the same education system that other communities have. The only thing about it is when people are already going through a tough time and already struggling and already just trying to get by, to add on to that, the police coming into their communities and always harassing them and always picking on them and being aggressive to them for no reason doesn't make it any better. So it is true that people should be upset, at their elected officials, but when you're upset with your elected officials, the way to hold them accountable is you vote them out. How do you hold police accountable? And it seems that if they always are getting away with something, so the individuals in the community are upset with law enforcement because they're never held accountable for anything. It's always they're free, or when they do something wrong, it's not the citizens' fault, or it's not the police fault, it's the citizens' fault. It needs to be fair across the board, just not holding elected officials accountable, but also holding our police departments accountable.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's some, I agree with him to some extent. Police have a tough job, and when you have to make a split-second decision whether or not to pull a trigger, for example, it takes the Supreme Court months, years sometimes to review that and decide whether or not they were right or wrong. You usually don't have that time when you're on the street and you're enforcing the law and something critical happens right in front of you. So that's why many times the police are given some flexibility and some leeway by the community. I don't think any officer comes to work and thinks, today I'm going to go out and break the law and abuse somebody and abuse their rights, and I'll get away with it. There are some that are like that. I ran our internal affairs unit for years, and I guarantee you there are people like that. But I think we're pretty good in law enforcement at finding those people and weeding them out of the law enforcement service. I think we're fairly effective at that. We could always do better.
Before we go on to the next topic, I want to get another voice into this conversation. Earlier this week, Anne-Marie Berger spoke to some seniors and we got their take on the last year.
What should we understand? What should somebody 25 years older than you that doesn't have children understand about kids in high school today? What do you think they need to know?
A lot of times people don't understand that adults are not the only ones affected. A lot of times children are also affected too, because even children younger than us, they watch and they see what goes on around. They may not always speak on it, but they do see what's going on. And a lot of times people don't understand that we are affected as well.
And you're talking about what happened in August.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest challenge is actually being able to hold on to our youth, because with us being Black in America, I think that we're forced to grow up far before we're ready. And so you can't necessarily enjoy your youth.
So it's like, I know I haven't done anything wrong, but I know that to someone else, it may appear that I'm doing something wrong just because of the color of my skin.
Do you see other people and wonder what they think about you? And by other, I mean white.
I do sometimes, but at a certain point, I had to stop myself from thinking that way.
Think back August on. Has anything changed for you in the way that you think?
I guess it's more so of what am I going to do? What am I going to do next? Because, of course, I've always been aware of it, but now it's just like the pressure's on now, considering it's a couple of miles away from me, so I got to do something. So that's why my thinking, it channeled into more so of action, planning, thought.
And just me personally, like I think about my next moves more. So I'm not so spontaneous, like I like to actually think things through before I do it now.
Like walking across a parking lot, or where you're gonna go to college? Like when you're saying you're...
like walk, like where I go, who I'm with, things like that.
What you wear, how you walk, all of that?
All of that.
Does it change you?
It's made me think a lot more about different things. It's opened up my eyes to a lot of things. And now now I think a lot of times, like, where do we go from here? For me, it was different because it was so close to home. Like, living here, I was kind of used to seeing stuff on the news. But with this particular situation, I knew everything that was going on. Like, I could go outside and just hear everything that was going on.
So let's just jump in right where they were just talking. Has anything changed? In fact, that goes back to a tweet that someone had in the previous piece, that nothing has changed since Ferguson. Gwen, has anything changed? I'll open it up to all three of you. I'll start with you, Gwen.
I think we have like a new civil rights movement. I think that people have definitely been reinvigorated as far as organizing, as far as protesting, as far as demonstrating, and I think it was needed. So if nothing else has changed, that has changed. We still have some of the same problems. I'm going to go back to the Kerner report, but one of the things that they said was when they talked about the causes of the uprisings of the 60s, it was, you mentioned that, it was black frustration with the lack of economic opportunities. We're still talking about that. Residential segregation was another problem. We're still talking about that. We're talking about a lot of the same issues that they were talking about in 1968 and really during the 50s and the 40s and the 30s, because these issues keep coming up over and over and over again. And I think people are refocused on those issues. I always think about when President Obama was elected and people were saying we're in a post-racial society. Racism is dead.
Who was saying that most, do you think? White folks, black folks?
I think it was white folks hoping, not wanting to address that problem. Another thing that the Kerner report said, and we don't like to talk about these issues so much anymore, is like, they said white racism is one of the problems. And I still think that's a problem. We've got to face these issues. And I think we're at least beginning to grapple more with these issues than we were maybe 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, before Michael Brown was so tragically killed. So I think things are definitely changed. There's definitely more scrutiny when any African American or any person of color or anybody, period, is the victim of some sort of police violence. We're looking at it. We're on it. We're watching it. We're scrutinizing it.
Why is this so hard to talk? Is it? I mean, Chief, is this a hard conversation for you to have?
No, it's not a hard conversation for many of us in law enforcement. Have things changed in the law enforcement world since August 9th? Absolutely. No doubt about it. We've seen Senate Bill 5 passed. That's going to have a huge effect in the municipal courts in St. Louis County. We saw the governor today speak about additional training for police officers. The thing I think that we're missing, the piece that we're missing that needs to change still, is there's one common theme in all of these situations where a suspect is killed by the police. And it's that the individual is resisting arrest or they're not following the officer's command. I'm not saying that's a good reason that they should be killed. I don't mean that at all. What I'm saying is, if there's no resisting, generally speaking, there's not going to be any harm. And we have to address that piece as well, or we're just fixing one part of this and we're not fixing the other part of it. And I think that's going to be the challenge. Do we go back into our schools or do we have someone like James Clark from Better Family Life go into our schools and talk to young men and women about what to do when they encounter the police and what to expect from the police and what the police expect from you. And if you don't like what the police did, this is your recourse. This is how you follow through with that. I think we have to get that piece involved here.
How does that sit with you and the people that you hang out with and the people you represent on the Ferguson Commission?
I hate to kind of disagree with you again, Chief, but that little piece, I would change and take that out and say the thing we need is better relationship building between the community and the police. And then it's not going to start on the community side, it has to start with the police. If the police knew the ones that they were actually protecting and serving, when they're resisting arrest, the first thing in their mind wouldn't be to pull out a handgun. And it's in what I guess upset people in the African American community is when, when an African American resists arrest, they are most likely found dead. But when you have a Caucasian person resisting arrest and they even have maybe a handgun, they happen to be apprehended, they happen to be taken into jail. It's not the same way for each side. So I think that's why people are so upset. In my opinion, I feel like things have changed. We have a lot more changing to do, but like my sister said to the left of me, the most beautiful thing that has happened is to see the young people that have never probably stepped up for themselves or never organized before and came together and against one common force and finally said no more. No longer will my voice be silent. No more will I allow people to say that my life does not matter, because my life does matter, and I'm gonna show it. So it has been small steps, but I think the African American community needs to see drastic change to really feel like change has happened.
Drastic change from our systems of government, from our, what do you mean when you say drastic change?
I mean, from the systems of government, from within our communities, elected officials. I mean, one thing, dramatic changes, and one thing that the commission is also recommending is like getting rid of so many of these municipalities and getting rid of so many of these police departments. We're not saying that we don't need police officers. We're not saying that, you know, officers don't have a tough day, but what we're saying is it is too many of these municipalities, it is too many of these departments, and they're not really focused on the community, but like you said, elected officials are pushing them to raise revenue because their municipality and department is so small. So it's this horrible relationship between police and community, and it's never going to get better. You can't pull someone over one day for no reason, then the next day try to be friends with them, because I got to go to court and I probably may not even have money for all these extra little tickets that you added on to. So,
back to Rasheen's point, do the police have a greater responsibility to change in this relationship? They are the ones with the power, with the authority.
Well, certainly the police are seen really as the symbol of government. So yes, we do have a great responsibility and do need some changes. And I have to agree with you 100% when it comes to the talk of the need to write tickets and revenue and the bad feeling. And one minute you're handing out a baseball card to somebody in the community, the next minute you're giving them a ticket for having a screw missing out of their license plate. And I can tell you that those things really happen in some communities because they're interested in revenue. So I think that the change, the need is there on both sides. But it does heavily fall onto the government officials, as it should.
We talk about if we don't know our history, we repeat it. What you know, the chief mentioned something that's not being talked about. What do you see that maybe gets lost if we get too down the road in the weeds on one particular issue? We miss. Is there a bigger point?
I think there is a bigger issue. When Dylan Roof slaughtered those 9 people in Charleston, South Carolina. People were saying, "Oh, this lone crazy nut. This is not the way America does things." And I remember Gerald Horne, who's a respected historian. He said, "You have to look at the soil that nourished Dylan Roof. That the larger society is responsible." And I think we have to look at the larger society. What is the soil that nourishes a policeman that shoots a Michael Brown? What is the soil that nourishes a policeman that shoots a Walter Scott? What is the soil that nourishes a policeman that treats Sandra Bland the way she was treated? So we have to look at the larger society. The police are just a symptom of a larger problem with racism in this country, and I think we have to deal with racism. And I think until we honestly address that problem, these things are going to keep repeating themselves. I see it historically. I look at things historically. And these things keep happening over and over again. I'm sure the Ferguson Commission is going to come up with some great recommendations, but are we going to do anything with those recommendations? Are we going to follow those recommendations? If the larger society doesn't change, those recommendations might fall on deaf ears. And we don't want that to happen again.
Do any of you have an idea of how we change on some of these issues on a personal level? Because like when something like the Charleston shootings happen, a lot of people said he's a lone wolf. And a lot of people said that that's a very blind, you have a blind spot for seeing it that way, that it's not treated the same as if this is terrorism. It's not, if it had been someone of a particular faith, it might have been considered, looked at differently. It goes beyond just what we're talking about from Ferguson. How do we have a more productive conversation around race?
It's a tough issue because race is so embedded and has been embedded in our country for so long. One thing I can say is continuing to fight, and the ones that have been oppressed. I noticed when we first started this Ferguson movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, when we was going out protesting, it wasn't a lot of people on our side, and it's still the majority still seem not to understand why young people are going to the streets and saying Black Lives Matter. But over time, we've been able to have conversations and dialogues with other individuals who may not understand why we're in the streets for the last 100 days or yelling, FTP, or why we're so angry. Over time, you're going to pull some people to your side. You're not going to be able to get them all. But if you're able to just pull one person and 2 person, and hopefully they'll pull 1 and 2, because they can go back to their colleagues and won't be able to say the same things that I said, and their friends will be able to get it.
Are sides what we need? Is that what we're talking about? I know.
I was thinking the exact same thing. I said, this isn't about pulling people away from each other and and being far away. We need to figure out how to come together as opposed to saying you're on this side or you're on that side. I prefer to say, when I saw the violence and the rioting in Ferguson, I said to myself, I can see why this is happening, knowing the history of what we have in this area of St. Louis County. I would never condone the burning and the looting, never, ever, ever. But I can see how the anger was there and how the anger was pent up. So I think we have to both understand each other's point of view and understand, and I think that'll be the solution to coming together is both, if we're going to call it sides, if both sides say, listen, I understand your point of view as long as you understand my point of view. And intelligent people can disagree. But I think that's the way that we have to have those conversations, is agree that we were all raised differently, we were all grew up in different neighborhoods, we all have different perspectives on life, and how can we find common ground to get past this instead of picking sides and saying, you're with me or you're against me.
We have about 30, 45 seconds left. Some people are worried about this coming weekend, this anniversary. Should they?
Shouldn't be worried at all. The young people and the folks that are coming in and folks that are already here that want to be part of this not only sad moment but celebration of what small positive things have came from Ferguson. I don't think no one should be scared. They're just like last time, you know, everyone got so frightened that, oh my gosh, horrible things are going to happen. Nothing horrible came. If anything positive came out of it.
We'll leave it there. Join us on our Twitter chat next Tuesday, and until next week, stay tuned.